In this video, we're going to talk about the micro skills of compassion. These are micro skills that have been put together through theory and through microethnography, that's close observation of many dozens of seminars across my university. These micro skills can be assessed. We can talk about the credentials for doing that in a minute, but assessing the micro skills, and they can be assessed, is the key to rooting compassion into the institution in a language that the HE institution understands: assessment. So, what are these skills? Well, a number of them have been demonstrated in the original film that I'd like to refer you back to, Embedding and Assessing Compassion in the University Curriculum, demonstrated there in action by students. So, if we are going to root compassion into the system, the HE system, through assessment, and that means awarding the micro skills of compassion academic credit, then why not let's start with the assessment criteria that is being used in HE now, at least in this university at the moment, and I understand this is moving into other universities too, but more about that later. The enactment of compassion, after all, requires cognitive thinking, cognitive skills, meaning making, interpreting, and decision making, and that is enmeshed into working with the subject, also in cognitive ways. These criteria I can talk you through now in terms of the practicalities of the micro skills. This version of the criteria is available below this film, and another version also. These criteria have been put together through close observation, microethnographic field notes in many dozens of seminars, tutorials, and other types of group work in this university. And not just in this university either, but they are underpinned by this multidisciplinary, intersecting theoretical body around compassion that supports them. In addition to that, these criteria in particular, these microethnographic skills criteria, have been approved by external examiners, a number of these now for the University of Hertfordshire, and in many cases commended. They have been examined and approved by the University of Hertfordshire's Academic Quality Assurance Office. They have been inspected for their linguistic appropriacy at CRELA, which is a research centre in English language learning at the University of Bedfordshire. So let's imagine then that your students come into the first module of the seminar. You want them to get going on discussions. This is not a lecture, it's a seminar or a tutorial. You want them to get going on discussions of material, to support each other, to stimulate each other's ideas. And you might think about getting them into discussion groups. One of the things that we notice immediately, you may see, is that sometimes students arrange themselves in discussion groups in rows. That isn't terribly conducive to the micro skills that they're going to be using. Assuming that you have perhaps looked at the idea of speed meeting them, of showing them a film of what compassion actually means, the film that was shown earlier of the dog on the highway saving its companion. Assuming that you have shown them the checklist of things that can go wrong with seminars that they already may be familiar with, getting into groups should be fairly easy as long as they are in a circular shape. This is to manage the eye contact. There are three types of eye contact: inclusive, excluding, and avoidant. And we're going to talk about those one by one because they are key mediators of these group dynamics. When people sit in groups, our students have noticed, once they've got going with the micro skills, that having a laptop up in front of them, having a pile of books in front of them, can obstruct, can undermine communicative ease. So students have said even when they push away a pile of books, in other modules, in other situations where the compassionate skills are not taken account of, they notice that people's responses to them change. So thinking about the physical space that's to be used is also quite a useful thing to do. Once the discussion is going, perhaps on an article that you want students to discuss, or some other item, or from a previous lecture, or whatever it is you've decided, or perhaps, my favorite, they have brought an article each and they are explaining one by one what is in their own article so that they have ownership of that. One of the first things to consider is inclusive eye contact. So we're going to look at those three types of eye contact one by one. Inclusive eye contact means that any student who is speaking, whether they are presenting something, whether they are simply joining in the discussion, any student who is speaking, when they do so, he or she looks at everybody in the group as though the group were a single organism, a single individual. Why? Well, because as Vertiga et al. 2003-2002 discovered when they were exploring enhancing video conferencing technology in Canada, they found when they tracked eye contact, eye gaze, that where people in the group felt or had the understanding or perceived that the person speaking was looking just at them, participation around the group became much more equal than when that was not the case. And perhaps as a result of that, the quality of decision making this study found, and it was repeated in the following year, was enhanced. So better quality thinking processes and decision making. Well, in that case, there is every reason to suggest that inclusive eye contact is a useful thing to take on board. And when students start to do this, they may feel a little awkward, but it's one of the things actually that they take up very soon and get very good at. And get very good at correcting each other gently, non-verbally often, when they are left out of excluding contact. There are two ways this can be done. The colluder, who of course is included in excluding eye contact. This is where inclusive eye contact has been forgotten for the moment, and two people are talking to each other. A monopolizer, somebody who's anxious or over-enthusiastic, is often going to lock eye contact. You'll notice this again and again with one other person. It may be you as the tutor, it may be somebody in the group. It's often somebody in front of the speaker or on their right, if they're right-handed. The colluder has a responsibility, and this is being assessed, this is being marked, to realize, to interpret what is happening here, that by participating in a one-to-one with the person who has a lot to say, wants to speak, and excluding the others in the group to the left, to the right, they are going to lose marks, and they are, more importantly, they are downgrading the group's chances to think together at an optimum level of input from all that's required, these alternative perspectives and moments of traction that are being overlooked and missed out. The colluder has a responsibility, therefore, and this is all explained and discussed in the first seminar, to break eye contact gently with the monopolizer and simply look at the others in the group. If I'm the monopolizer that has locked eye contact with an excluder, with a colluder, then my eye contact is automatically directed to the others. What are you looking at? Oh, and seamlessly and without need for any words. And this is now going to invite others to speak, as Vertiga found, Vertiga et al. I've noticed as well that when students are being excluded in the group, they will show this through body language. They'll be doodling, they'll be looking out the window, they'll be looking at their watches, they maybe even have a little fiddle with their mobile phone. And sometimes they're signaling of unhappiness at being excluded is very, very explicit, and it needs to be noticed. This is good ethnography for students to learn, microethnography. So you might see students like this. I've seen this, perhaps you've seen it too, that when two people, let's imagine two people here speaking, and they have forgotten everybody else in the group. The body language of boredom is very evident here, and some resentment as well. What do you think of this when you see this? I'm sure you may have seen it once or twice. But when the situation is corrected and the colluder takes action, or somebody else in the group takes action, non-verbally, then we may see this. Okay, this signals, I've seen this a few times, coming back to the group, everything is forgiven, new start, and I am listening. There are so many ways that excluding eye contact can be broken up, if not by the colluder, then by others. They can lean in towards to attract the eye contact of the overspeaker. They can grab the air, as I've seen a Chinese student do fairly recently. They can make binocular eyes. They can wave gently. These are seamless ways to bring the group back to a cohesive whole, and they seem to be very, very effective. And I've noticed as well that these corrections can be made and accepted in very good humor in groups. I've never seen any resentment or resistance by overspeakers, as long as these rules are explored and negotiated with students in the very first seminar. One thing, though, that students do worry about if they are enthusiastic speakers is this. We know, don't we, that people who monopolize, people who dominate, may be doing this because they are over-enthusiastic, they've done all the reading, they're very engaged, or they are very anxious. And Yalom in group psychotherapy, Yalom 1985, says very pointedly that, and this is very interesting, we do not want to hear less from the monopolizers. We want, and he puts this in italics, we want to hear more. So what we can take from that is that we want to hear more of substance. I wonder if sometimes tutors get so enthusiastic about students who are willing to speak that they may sometimes we may be relieved that something is being said when in fact the substance of what is being said may actually be quite disappointing. Are we confusing performance with substance? What kind of performativity are we looking at? What kind of competitiveness are we looking at here? We need to be selective, perhaps. Students who talk a lot have this to say, and this is very interesting. If I speak less, my performance is going to be less. I won't be able to say as much as I want to, and I won't get the marks that I want to get. Because remember, if we're assessing this, then the final discussion is going to be filmed. The film is like the written essay. It's evidence of the student's performance, the individual student's performance in the group. The film is sent to the external examiner. The film is shown to the internal moderator. So here are students saying, well, I want to be on the film saying lots of good things. Actually, they may say this at the beginning of the module, but I'm glad to say actually that we have found again and again, and students have come forward and explained this themselves in interviews. For example, I used to grit my teeth, says one student, letting others speak who were also monopolizers. But I've realized that, and I'm paraphrasing here, that since and taking an example of one such student in the third year literature, that since I have started to pull back, let other people rush in or come in and say what they want to say, I hold back, I listen more carefully, and actually I build on what they have said. Well, there is your substance. There is your greater substance, and this is of tremendous help to the group's thinking process. And that student and others too say they have noticed that others who tend to monopolize are doing the same, that they are actually holding back too. These skills seem to get internalized and learnt very quickly indeed. Students talk about a zone, going to a zone, these kinds of micro skills becoming fluid and natural. The word comes up a lot, even from students who have resisted them at the beginning of the module, talking about this being kumbaya, being back at school nonsense. And those resistant students are very often the fiercest, the most, the strongest advocates for taking these skills into the workplace, where they have found differences in the way people behave to them, and onto other modules where they will not be rewarded with grades, with higher marks. And so this is time for us to consider our students not as being mechanists, strategists, who will only be nice to each other because of marks. That is a very poor opinion of our students. In actual fact, we see that they internalize these things quite quickly, and it's on the hoof. It's always on the hoof anyway, so again, very difficult to rehearse. In the next part of this film, we will be looking at the quieter student and what we can do through the microethnography of compassion to perhaps change the landscape for them too. And that's associated very much with avoidant eye contact. See you then, hopefully.